Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our continuing documentary on the evolution of Hamas in the United States. Jennifer Baker is back with us today.
Hi, Laura. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And in the last episode, we mentioned that the original Hamas propaganda front in the U.S., the Islamic Association for Palestine, closed and a replacement organization was opened called the AMP.
Yes, we touched on that very briefly at the end. And we said that the Islamic Association for Palestine, the IAP, closed its doors after a jury found it liable for the death of David Boehm, who died at the hands of Hamas murderer. We also said that the IAP reconstituted itself under a new name, the American Muslims for Palestine. And today, we're going to talk more about the AMP.
What do we know about them?
Well, they officially opened their doors in 2006 in Palos Hills, Illinois. And you will recall, or maybe not, because we didn't really talk about it, the IAP was in the same area of Chicago when it shuttered its doors. Specifically, its office was on the very same street as the new AMP office that opened up just blocks away. So basically the same, area.
That's very interesting. What about their leadership?
Well, many of those leaders are people whose faces we've already seen in the podcast, the leaders that opened and operated the AMP. Original prominent figures in the AMP included Rafiq Jabber of the IAP, Osama Abu Arshad of the IAP and UASR, Salah Sarsour of the IAP, and whose brother identified him as financing Hamas in the late 1990s. We talked about that. One of the co-founders of the AMP was Hatem Bazian, a professor. Bazian also founded the first chapter for the Students for Justice in Palestine at UC Berkeley many years ago. And he's the current chairman of the board for the Muslim Legal Fund of America, which, as you will recall, was opened in the aftermath of the HLF's designation as a terror front.
I remember that discussion about the MLFA. What other leaders do they have in common with the IAP?
Well, there were several others, notably Kifa Mustafa, who ran the HLF Chicago office. He was running that office when the HLF was designated as a front for Hamas. So he's involved with the AMP.
So, Laura, did they still hold those annual conventions in the Chicago area like IAP?
Yes, and they still do, actually, an annual convention. This year, it occurs over Thanksgiving holiday that week, and we will talk more about that in a later episode.
It's very interesting developments in the mid-2000s. What was going on with Hamas in the Middle East?
Well, let's back up to 2005, because AMP was created in 2006 officially. After the long, difficult Second Intifada, Hamas was rapidly gaining ground in its grassroots efforts to have those hearts and minds of the population. Hamas won the majority of legislative council seats in the January 2006 elections. And, at the time, the Palestinian prime minister who was, and let me go back and tell you about this. So Yasser Arafat had passed away, and the new Palestinian prime minister or president was a man named Mahmoud Abbas, who also went by the name Abu Mazen. And so back to the original point, Hamas participated in these legislative council elections and won a majority of the seats over Fatah.
And Laura, how is that perceived by the Palestinian Authority?
Well, that's definitely a complicated question. I mean, they were not happy in general. They lost the majority vote, right? And the question that arose was, would they work together in government with Hamas?
What happened in the aftermath of the elections?
Well, Hamas formed its government led by Ismail Haniyeh.
Wait, wasn't that the leader we spoke about when we talked about Ahmed Youssef, the head of the UASR, and one of the three original Hamas fronts that left the U.S. to become the political advisor?
For Ismail Haniyeh, yes, that's exactly right.
So a man who led one of the first three Hamas fronts in the U.S. was so important that he became the advisor to Ismail Haniyeh, who was leading the Hamas government.
Yes, exactly. That's how important the U.S.-based guys were. And this forming of the government was not smooth, as you can imagine.
So given the long time inner battles between Hamas and Fatah, who led the Palestinian Authority since its establishment.
Yes, the inner battles were longstanding, right? And when this happened, the international community demanded that Hamas renounce violence. Otherwise, they threatened to suspend aid to the Palestinian territories, knowing that if they sent aid and Hamas was in control, they were just going to take it and use it for their own purposes, like they did anyway, even when they weren't in government.
I can imagine Hamas did not renounce violence since its own charter, it calls for jihad or death, no peace.
Yes, you are correct. They refused to renounce violence or recognize Israel as a country.
So, Laura, was there a conflict between Hamas and Fatah that deepened?
Yes, in June of 2007, it got worse.
I'm certain Iran continues to support Hamas.
Yes, they did, with money and arms.
So did Hamas and Fatah ultimately negotiate?
Yes, but it was never stable. They formed a unity government, but there were clashes. In mid-June 2007, Hamas attacked the Palestinian Authority forces in Gaza. They took over key positions. They killed Fatah preventative security forces, and then Hamas took complete control over Gaza.
الله أكبر.
So they basically took it by force with violence.
Yes, something they do well.
What was the AMP doing at that point?
Well, they continued to host their annual festival featuring speakers like Kifa Mustafa, and let's just talk about these guys who ran the HLF Chicago office when it was designated as a terror group. Another speaker was Osama Abu Arshad, formerly of the IAP and the UASR. Hatem Baizian, currently head of the Muslim Legal Fund of America and co-founder of AMP and founder of the SJP. And then you had Ziad Hamdan and Jamal Saeed.
So Ziad Hamdan was number 20 on the original list of the US-based Hamas leaders from 1991. Is that right?
Yes, and Jamal Saeed, whom we have not really spoken about a lot during this series, but he's important. He was number 10 on that original list of the US-based Hamas leaders.
Did they have the CAIR leader Nahad Awad speak?
Yes, and Khalil Meek, who was part of the CAIR DFW chapter that Ghassan Alashi helped found, and then Khalil Meek is the president, I think that's his current title, with the Muslim Legal Fund of America. Interestingly, at this convention in 2007, they hosted a man named Raed Salah, who spoke from afar.
Who is he?
So he is a famous leader of the Islamist movement called called the Islamic Movement in Israel, and he's from al-Fahim. He was involved with the Islamic Relief Committee in al-Fahim.
So that was the organization where Marzouk funneled $200,000 in 1992 to the Islamic Relief Committee for weapons.
Yes, through the U.S.-based Holy Land Foundation.
Okay.
Exactly. And Raed Salah has been arrested many times by Israel for his activities related to financing of Hamas. And he was even arrested in 2012 by the United Kingdom. He traveled there and found out he was a prohibited person, and so they detained him and deported him.
The AMP had quite a lineup for that convention.
Yes, like they always seem to.
So the HLF had been indicted. What was going on with that?
A trial was held in 2007, and a mistrial was declared, which meant the government had to retry the whole case. And that occurred in November of 2008.
We should talk about that.
Yes. 7 people were originally charged with providing material support in this case, in addition to the entity, the HLF, being charged. But when the arrest happened, 2 of those people had already fled the country, and they're still international fugitives today. But 5 individuals were tried: Shukri Abu Bakr, Mohammed El-Mazain, Ghassan Al-Ashi, Abdulrahman Odeh, and Mufid Abdul-Qadir, and convicted.
And Shukri was the executive director of the HLF and a major speaker at the 1993 Philadelphia conspiratorial meeting.
Yes, and he was on that list of the original U.S.-based Hamas leaders dated 1991.
And Ghassan Al-Ashi was a senior leader in the HLF and also in Infocom. And he had already been convicted of terrorism-related charges in the 2 Infocom trials. Is that right?
Yes, and he also, as we will recall, helped found CAIR's DFW chapter.
That's right. And then Mohammed Al-Mazain was the first chairman of the board for the HLF. And he also once led the HLF's New Jersey office and the HLF San Diego office. Is that right?
Yes, and he was on the original list of the U.S.-based Hamas leaders from 1991 as well. He was also on that call with the next defendant, Abdulrahman Odeh, about how beautiful one of the suicide bombing operations was that killed so many people. And while we're on that, Odeh ran the HLF New Jersey office after Mohammed El-Mazain moved to San Diego.
And Mufid was an HLF fundraiser who sang with the IEP band. He used to do skits where he pretended to kill Jews and the IEP and HLF fundraisers.
Yes,
is that right?
That's right. And he's the half-brother of senior Hamas political bureau leader Khalid Mashal.
Yes, okay, I remember that now.
Let's hear from one of the prosecutors about what happened during the trial.
Hi, I'm Barry Jonas. I am an assistant United States attorney in the Northern District of Illinois, which is in Chicago. I am speaking here on my own behalf and not on behalf of the U.S. government, Department of Justice, or the U.S. Attorney's Office. I was one of the 3 prosecutors in the case of the United States versus Holy Land Foundation. That was a case that we charged in 2004 and then superseded the indictment in 2005, where we charged the Holy Land Foundation itself and 7 of its top members, including Shukri Abu Bakr, Ghassan Al-Ashi, Mohammed El-Mazain, Mufid Abdul-Qadir, Abdulrahman Odeh, Haitham Magwari, and Akram Mashal, with multiple counts of providing material support to a foreign terrorist organization, that is Hamas, multiple counts of providing support to a specially designated global terrorist, which is again Hamas, multiple counts of money laundering, and multiple counts of filing false charitable information tax returns where they failed to report that they were providing support to Hamas. The trial began in September of 2008 against the organization itself and 5 of the defendants. Akram Mashal and Haitham Magwari were fugitives before we had a chance to arrest them. They left the country. Trial went for about 6 or 7 weeks, ending in late November. The defendants were convicted of all charges across the board. Several months later, they were sentenced to multiple different sentences, where Abdulrahman Odeh was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Mufid Abdul-Qadir was sentenced to 20 years. Mohammed El-Mazain was sentenced to 15 years. And Shukri Baker and Ghassan Al-Ashi were sentenced to 65 years each. We broke the trial into 2 halves. The first half, we proved that the HLF was created by and for Hamas, that they were part of the Palestine Committee. We did this through a whole bunch of different storylines and vignettes. And we then bridged the first half to the second half, which is the actual crime, that is providing financial support to Hamas, specifically Zakah committees located in the West Bank and Gaza. And the first half was proving that the HLF and the supporters were part of the Palestine Committee. Effectively, they were Hamas in America. And then we bridged to the second half, which was proving the crime, the money going to Hamas. And we did that through bank records and showing first transactions leaving the HLF authorized by our defendants to, I think, 12 or 13 Zakah committees located in the West Bank and Gaza. Jenin Zakah Committee, Tulkarm Zakah Committee, Kakili Zakah Committee, Hebron, and a few others. The hardest part of this case, the one that people said we could never do, was proving that the Zakah committees were in fact controlled by Hamas. And we did that basically in two parts: evidence that we gathered in the United States and evidence that the Israelis gathered over in the West Bank. The evidence in the United States consisted of recordings from the Philadelphia meeting where the Palestine Committee brought in a speaker from the West Bank to talk about the different committees and how they controlled them. There were also records seized from El Barassi's home that showed the committees and how much Hamas controlled them by saying things like, we have 7 out of 11, or we have all of them, meaning how much they controlled the board that ran the committee. There were a few other documents that we gathered in the United States to show that these committees are controlled by Hamas. And then we also added in records from the Israelis, things that were seized from the committees, such as Hamas military documents, suicide posters, things of that nature, key change showing support for suicide bombers, things like that. And so between the combination of those two, plus we had testimony from multiple individuals that talked about the Zakah committees being controlled by Hamas, including an expert from the Israeli government, collectively gave us enough evidence to show that, in fact, these Zakah committees were, in fact, controlled by Hamas, and all the money HLF was sending there was for the support and benefit of Hamas. The trial lasted about 6 or 7 weeks. The jury was out 6 days. They came back after 6 days with guilty verdicts across the board against every single defendant. Several months later, we had the sentencing. The judge sentenced Abdurrahman Odeh and Mohammed Al-Mazain to 15 years each. He sentenced Mufid Al-Bukhari to 20 years, and he sentenced Ghassan Al-Ashi and Shukri Abu Bakr to 65 years each. Our very first witness in the trial was Matt Levitt, who educated the jury on Hamas. It was basically Hamas 101, and he spent close to 3 days doing this, and all he talked about was what the jury is going to hear going forward, including these Zakah committees, how they were part of the social wing of Hamas, and how the social wing was the bedrock that gave Hamas its strength. So they have the social wing, the military wing, and the political committee. The social wing was the largest part of the triangle that gave Hamas support of the local population. It allowed Hamas to recruit people. It allowed Hamas to use some of the schools and the mosques to conduct terrorist activity. And we had records showing that HLF supported financially some of the families of the suicide bombers. We had videotapes of some of the Zakah committees showing, for example, kindergarten graduation ceremonies where the children were dressed up, wearing suicide belts, carrying machine guns, dressed as some of the very famous Hamas and Hezbollah members, and singing songs against Israel and talking about killing Israelis. So one of the videos that we had was of the HLF representative in Ramallah in the West Bank, where he's with a young child standing in front of a sign that says Holy Land Foundation for Relief and Development. And he's saying to this child, whose father was killed by the Israelis in a very tragic situation, you remember who killed your father. It was the Jews who killed your father. And when you grow up, you're going to remember that, aren't you? As they're providing support and aid to this child. So certainly the brainwashing the children with here is food, here is education, here is healthcare, and remember who we are and remember who our enemies are and what they've done to our people. They're indoctrinating the young class or the youngsters to become future Hamas members, Hamas supporters. As an evidentiary matter, prior to the trial, we submitted a trial brief along with a list of co-conspirators. And the reason we do that is because we want statements of co-conspirators to be admitted at trial. And we have to first establish that there is a fact of conspiracy and that these individuals or groups are co-conspirators. And we do that before the trial. And then the judge agrees or disagrees. And if the judge agrees, then those statements can come in at trial. We did that in this case. And what we proved at trial and what the judge confirmed was that organizations like CAIR, CAIR, IAP, the Islamic Association to Palestine, the United Association of Studies and Research, which was created by Musa Abu Marzouk, and other groups were in fact co-conspirators. Some of these groups challenged that and brought a separate lawsuit against the government. The court in that separate lawsuit found, in fact, that we had proven that those groups were in fact co-conspirators. They then challenged the judge's ruling to the Fifth Circuit, and the Fifth Circuit affirmed that the evidence showed that these groups were in fact co-conspirators of HLF in providing support to Hamas. The individual defendants had 5+ attorneys, or each had their own attorney. In some cases, they had more than one. Every witness was subjected to cross-examination by all 5 defense attorneys, although not every witness was cross-examined by all 5. The sentencing was in 2009, as I said already, what the defendants received. Shortly after, they filed an appeal to the Fifth Circuit. It was a very contentious appeal. The Fifth Circuit ultimately upheld all the convictions and the sentences in a very lengthy opinion that was, if I remember correctly, about 130 to 140 pages, covering lots and lots of issues. The defendants then filed a certiorari motion or appeal to the Supreme Court, which the Supreme Court denied cert. The defendants, and after that, filed what we call 2255 motions, where they attacked their attorneys, saying their attorneys were not competent in representing the defendants. That was denied. And at that point, the defendants ran out of legal options.
That is very interesting, Laura. But what about the rest of the infrastructure?
They continue doing business as usual. We'll get into that next time. Thank you for joining us.
See you next time. Take care.
Take care.